Hey, you're watching Swifty, and in this episode, I'm going to demonstrate a strong reference cycle between class instances. We're going to look at the example of a person and an apartment, both holding strong references to each other, and therefore cannot be deallocated. Let's do it. So let's go over a problem that automatic reference counting cannot help you with. And that's when you have a strong reference cycle, meaning that the count of references to an instance will never go down to zero, but your code doesn't need it anymore. So it creates a memory leak. So let's define a class called person, and person is going to have a name, and it's going to have, we're going to be able to initialize it with the name, and we're going to say self.name equals name, and we're going to print name was initialized, and we're going to say, we're also going to give it another property that's optional called apartment, because the person could have an apartment, they might not. And we're going to create the apartment down here, apartment. We're going to create a dinit definition, and we're going to print the name of the person was de-initialized. All right, and the apartment is going to have a unit string, and we're going to assign that unit, and then we're going to print that this apartment was initialized, unit was initialized, and then we're also going to print when it's de-initialized, and we're also going to give it a property called tenant. Now this is where the strong reference cycle potential comes into play. So an instance of an apartment can hold a reference to an instance of a person, and an instance of a person can hold a reference to an instance of an apartment. If the instance of the person has no references except for its apartment's reference to it, and the instance of the apartment has no references other than the instance of the person to it, then a strong reference cycle is created. You have a memory leak, and your code isn't going to use those instances. So there are some solutions to solve it, but let me demonstrate a strong reference cycle in practice. So we can declare a name. John is of type person, and var, or optional person, and var unit for A, for A is of type apartment. Now they're both set to nil, as you can see over here, so we don't have to worry about counting references to instances of classes yet. So let's say John is equal to person, and we're going to give it a name, John, and now reference count to the instance created on line 30 equals 1 strong. And now we're going to say unit 4A equals an apartment, and we're going to give it a unit called 4A, 4A, 1, doesn't really matter. We can call it 4. Now, reference count to the instance created on line 32 equals 1 strong. It's a 1 strong reference, and I'm going to draw it on Sketch just so you can see. All right, so we have one person created after line 30, and then after line 32, we have an apartment instance created. So that takes up some memory as well, and we got to give it the names, which are the references in essence. So apartment has one unit John has this instance of a person has one reference. This instance of an apartment has one reference. Both of them are strong, so neither of these two instances will be deallocated. And because we can see that we gave a value to John and we gave a value to unit 4A, now let's make them reference each other. So John, and we're going to force unwrap it, and we're going to give it the apartment is equal to unit 4A. Now I'm going to draw an arrow in our sketch diagram. Now person is referencing, this instance of a person is referencing the apartment as of this line. And now we're going to do the same thing for unit 4A. We're going to force unwrap it because we just gave it a value, and we're going to give the tenant is equal to John. And now what is the count of references on person? It's two. Two strong references. John is referencing the person instance, and the apartment, or the tenant property on the apartment more specifically, is referencing this instance of a person, and the person's apartment is referencing this instance of an apartment, and the name unit 4A is also referencing this instance of an apartment. So going to put this right here. Reference count to the instance created on line 30, which is this person instance, is actually going to be 2. And then after this line, reference count to this tenant, to this apartment property on line 32 is going to be 2 now. So if I were to just go John equals nil, it decrements it. So instead of 2, it's now at 1. And now if I were to make unit 4A equal nil, then the reference count to the instance created on line 32, this instance of an apartment, is equal to 1. And now you notice that there's no way for me to access these two instances of a person, this instance of a person and instance of an apartment, but they cannot be taken out of memory because they're both referencing each other. So this is called a memory leak. Basically, memory is being taken up, but I can't even use it. And you can tell that neither of these were deallocated because the dinit wasn't even called for either of them. So this kind of problem is called a strong reference cycle, and it's the primary downside to using automatic reference counting. But there are some solutions to it, and it's important as a Swift developer to know those solutions.